There are stories that turn into dark legends, remembered forever. These are tales about things better left forgotten but impossible to erase from memory. Such is our story, the story of a family that faced ancient evil, a curse that stretched through generations. But perhaps it's best to start with that fateful day when our lives began to slowly spiral into the abyss. Our house stood in a small village, nestled among dense forests. The house was old, and I often felt that something ancient lingered within its walls, something that had lived there far longer than we had. Mom always said that the house had witnessed many events, that its walls were steeped in history. None of us knew that this history was not just memory, but an ancient evil hidden in the shadows of the past. Our family was small: Mom, Dad, me, and my younger brother Ethan. We lived modestly but happily, enjoying the simple pleasures of village life. We were accustomed to the silence and tranquility that our routine provided. Everything changed on that fateful night when we all had the same horrifying nightmares. It was late summer. The day had been hot, but as the sun began to set, a cold, unsettling wind descended upon the village. The clouds gathered over the house, and a foreboding silence hung in the air, like the calm before a storm. We all felt it, though we didn't speak of it aloud. That night, as we all went to sleep, we began to experience what would forever alter our lives. I couldn't fall asleep. The room was too dark, as if the darkness was thickening around me, breathing in my face. I tossed and turned in bed, trying to find a comfortable position, but every time I closed my eyes, I felt an increasing dread. Finally, when I began to drift off to sleep, it engulfed me. In the dream, I found myself in our own room, but it was alien. The walls, which I had known all my life, seemed distorted, like in a warped mirror. The air was thick with an acrid smell that stung my eyes. I tried to scream, but my voice was trapped in my throat, and a sense of dreadful helplessness overcame me. And then I heard the whisper. The whisper was everywhere. It came from the walls, the corners, from the very darkness itself. It wasn't just a voice, it was a chant, repeating the same thing, words I couldn't understand, but which evoked terror. I realized I was trapped, but I didn't understand how to escape. From the dark corner of the room, two bright red eyes suddenly appeared. They were like eyes watching me. These eyes came closer, and soon a figure emerged from the shadow. It was a person, but something about them was unnatural. Their eyes burned with rage, filled with something ancient and horrifying. I woke up screaming, my heart racing wildly. The room was quiet, too quiet. I tried to convince myself it was just a nightmare, but something inside me whispered, it wasn't just a figment of my imagination. This nightmare was too real. The next morning, we all gathered around the table. Mom looked exhausted, as if she hadn't slept at all. Dad was grim and silent, and Ethan stared into the void, as though something was consuming him from within. We sat in silence, each of us trying to process what had happened. I had a terrible dream, Mom finally said. She rarely shared such things, but her voice trembled now. I saw someone in the corner of my room. This person was watching me, their eyes were burning red, and I heard a whisper. Dad, frowning, nodded. I had the same thing. This whisper spoke of some kind of deal, as if it was time to repay something. I felt a chill seep into my heart. My nightmare was the same. Those eyes, that whisper. We had all seen the same thing? Then Ethan, in a quiet, barely audible voice, said he's come for me. This person. He said our great-great-grandfather made a deal with the devil. These words sounded like a death sentence. We sat in silence, not knowing what to say. We couldn't believe that the nightmares we had seen were real, but fear had already begun to gnaw at our family from within. Dad remembered an old book that was kept in the attic. It was a family relic, passed down through generations. He retrieved it, and that evening we all gathered together to uncover the truth. The book was ancient, its pages yellowed, and the text was handwritten. It recounted the history of our lineage, detailing how our ancestors lived and died. But the most terrifying part began when Dad reached the chapter describing the deal. Our great-great-grandfather had made a deal with a mysterious man who came to him at night. He promised him wealth and a long life in exchange for the soul of one of his future children. The great-great-grandfather was young and greedy for wealth, and he signed the contract without hesitation. But as the years went by, he realized that the devil always gets what he wants. The descendants of our great-great-grandfather had suffered from this curse. Each firstborn in the family was doomed. When the time came, the devil would come for them. And now it was Ethan's turn. We couldn't believe it. But everything in our lives began to crumble like a house of cards. Nights became nightmares, sleep turned into torture. Ethan was terrified. We were all terrified. Our family was falling apart before our eyes, and there was nothing we could do about it. Dad spent days and nights studying ancient texts, trying to find a way to break the deal, but it was all in vain. Soon Ethan began to change. He became withdrawn, silent, and aloof. We tried to reach out to him, but it was all for nothing. One night, I heard the whisper coming from his room. I went in and saw Ethan sitting on the floor, clutching his head with his hands, muttering to himself. He didn't notice me. I tried to approach, but suddenly his body began to convulse, as if something inside him was trying to break free. Then he abruptly fell silent. He turned to me, and I saw those same eyes, the eyes we had all seen in our dreams. "They've come back," he said, his voice not his own. "Now it's your turn." My heart froze in my chest. I realized that this was no longer my brother, but something else that had taken over his body and soul. I ran downstairs to tell my parents what had happened. We knew that time was running out. The next day, Dad announced that he had found a ritual that might break the deal. But the price was high. We had to sacrifice something dear to break the curse. We agreed to anything, just to save Ethan. The ritual had to take place in the same abandoned house where our great-great-grandfather had made his deal. We went there, holding each other's hands, hoping that this was our last chance. The house was dark and dilapidated, but within it, there was a sense of something malevolent, something that was waiting for us. Dad began the ritual, and the air around us thickened, becoming heavy and cold. I felt an invisible force closing in on us. Suddenly, the whisper that had haunted us in our dreams grew louder. We all heard it, and it was unbearable terror. Ethan suddenly screamed. His body began to convulse again, as if something inside him was trying to burst out. We tried to hold him down, but he thrashed, screamed, his face contorted in agony. At that moment, I realized the ritual was failing, that the curse would not release us. Dad realized it too. He stopped the ritual, despair evident in his eyes. We all understood that there was no salvation, that our fate was sealed. Ethan suddenly went still, his body slack, and he fell to the ground. His eyes opened, but they were no longer my brother's eyes. They were the same burning eyes I had seen in my nightmares. "It's over," he whispered, his voice as cold as ice. "Now it's your turn." We knew we had lost. The curse, like an ancient wound, had gnawed at our family from within, leaving only empty shells. Nothing could save us from this darkness. That night, returning home, I realized that our house was no longer ours. It had become a prison where we were doomed to wait our turn. Ethan disappeared the next morning, and we no longer attempted to search for him. We knew he wouldn't return. And that one day, the devil would come for my children.